want to be in your minds, kind of the banner this evening, is a reminder of the complete work of Jesus Christ. Invariably, in any kind of size setting, there will be people who have been involved in abortion in some way, whether it's directly through having an abortion or indirectly advising somebody to have an abortion. We need to understand that if we have asked for forgiveness, if we have repented, that we are forgiven. That is complete. That work is finished. But we shouldn't confuse the pain that comes from dealing with this issue, the pain that comes from healing, with the notion that we are unforgiven. That is not true. Okay, now we can't speak about abortion. We can't really talk around this issue until we first of all settle the facts. Is it coming up? Okay. And those facts are: who or what is the unborn child? What is it, that thing? And what is abortion? We can't talk about whether it's right or wrong until we've established these facts first of all. Now, you might be surprised to know that there is no room for doubt. In the science of embryology, every embryology textbook that you pick up agrees that human life begins at fertilization. Here's a quote: "The zygote formed by the union of an oocyte and a sperm is the beginning of a new human being." Because we're short of time, I'm not going to go into all of the quotes that are available, but we needn't go into that because Anne Furedi, who is the head of the British Pregnancy Advisory Service, the largest private abortion provider in the UK, acknowledges that the unborn child is a human being, and she says in her book, The Moral Case for Abortion, the opponents of abortion claim that abortion is wrong because it ends the life of the unborn child, whereas for the abortion's supporters, ending its life in the womb is precisely its point. We don't need to make the case that the unborn child is a human being when those who are providing abortion concede that point. But it's all very well talking about this and reading these quotes to you. What I want to do now is show you a very beautiful film of the unborn child. I'm just going to show you a few moments of it. And it shows the unborn child from around 6 weeks, 6 days, up to about 8 weeks. And these are ages from fertilization. And I'm showing you this age range because it's 90% of abortions occur in the first 13 weeks. So let's see if we can get this working.
Embryo to reflexively withdraw its head. The external ear is beginning to take shape. By 6 weeks, blood cell formation is underway in the liver, where lymphocytes are now present. This type of white blood cell is a key part of the developing immune system. Hiccups have been observed by 7 weeks. Leg movements can now be seen, along with a startle response. The 4-chambered heart is largely complete. On average, the heart now beats 167 times per minute. Electrical activity of the heart, recorded at 7.5 weeks, reveals a wave pattern similar to the adults. In females, the ovaries are identifiable by 7 weeks. Fingers are separate. And toes are joined only at the bases. The hands can now come together, as can the feet. Knee joints are also present. By 8 weeks, 75% of embryos exhibit right-hand dominance. The remainder is equally divided between left-handed dominance and no preference. This is the earliest evidence of right or left-handed behaviour. Head rotation, neck extension, and hand-to-face contact occur more often. Touching the embryo elicits squinting, jaw movement, grasping motions, and toe pointing. Between 7 and 8 weeks, the upper and lower eyelids rapidly grow over the eyes and partially fuse together. Although there is no air in the uterus, the embryo displays intermittent breathing motions by 8 weeks.
Luke 10, almost everybody knows it, the parable of the Good Samaritan. And in the parable of the Good Samaritan, Jesus responds to the question, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And by saying, love your neighbour. And the guy that Jesus is in conversation with says, well, who is my neighbour? Jesus proceeds to give the parable of the Good Samaritan in order to create this very broad definition of who our neighbour is. So I would say, if it is the case that the unborn child is a human being from fertilization, then we must consider them our neighbour. And if they are subject to being victims of violence, ending their lives, then we have an obligation to defend them. Proverbs 31, verse 8, for example, to speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. So if the unborn is our neighbour, we now need to look at the question of what is abortion. And this is how the BPAS and Faraday, I mentioned earlier, this is how they describe abortion. An abortion is the termination of a pregnancy. Up to 15 weeks, the pregnancy is removed by gentle suction with local anaesthetic. Over 15 weeks, the pregnancy is removed by a narrow forceps. This is taken from their website and their literature. The abortion industry is surviving through the use of euphemisms, comforting language, kind of hiding the truth of what they're doing. So what is the reality of abortion? Well, as we've already heard, that Satan he's a liar and he's a murderer. In every possible way, he is starkly polar opposite to Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ comes to bring life, to bring light. Satan comes to kill and destroy, and he uses deception and darkness to hide his deeds. What if, though, we were to see abortion not just as homicide, but as child sacrifice? Then would we be obliged even more to intervene on their behalf with a sense of urgency, like God pouring out his most fearsome wrath in the Old Testament against the practice of child sacrifice? Well, is abortion child sacrifice? Again, rather than me making the claim, we can go to Jeanette Paris. I have a copy of this book, and in this book, Jeanette Paris makes a case that abortion as a sacrifice to Artemis, abortion as a sacrament for the gift of life to remain pure. So you have this pagan teacher who is teaching abortion as as a sacrifice. And in fact, if you go to Amazon.com, the publisher says in their comment, as Jeanette Paris writes, abortion is about love, life, and death. Since its original publication, the book has been widely used in abortion clinics in Canada and in France, and has even been given by some doctors to each and every woman who had the procedure, along with the painkillers. But again, words fail us when we try and describe an indescribable horror. What I want to do now is show you a film that isn't so easy to watch. And again, I'm going to put your mind at rest. There's no narration to this film, so if you don't feel you can watch it, you can just avert your eyes. There's no obligation to watch it, but I would urge you to watch it, because until we can face this, we will not be able to fight it. We need to confront it. Even if we've been through this is an important step of understanding what we have done, and to remember while we watch it that Christ's forgiveness was complete 2,000 years ago. So this shows the reality of abortion from the first trimester right up to late term. And it is very difficult to watch, but please do try. I'm not going to be watching you. Just going to look at one other area of how bad this is. The current situation in the UK. The abortion lobby are currently pushing, and there probably will be a push through Parliament within the next few weeks, to decriminalise abortion. That means a woman can be on the way, 9 months pregnant, on the way to the delivery suite, change her mind, they change direction down the corridor, and she ends up having an abortion. A woman can have an abortion for any or no reason, with no justification. We have a very pro-abortion media who are kind of the mouthpiece of the abortion industry, and a willingly ignorant public. And that is, I think, how it's got this bad. And it's got this bad because we've probably all heard of the adage, evil prospers when good men do nothing. And the past response of the church has been, well, we haven't got time to be saving babies. But I have never heard somebody who is performing that procedure say, I don't have time to be killing them. When we say, look, church, we need your help in this. We need you to be a voice. They say, but we're already doing so much. They're doing all kinds of projects, but there's this one area that they don't want to touch. Now, what I want to quickly do is distinguish between, it sounds strange, and I've come up with this myself, and somebody can probably think of a better way of wording this, but popular injustice versus unpopular injustice. Okay. Now, can you imagine, this is to illustrate that point, can you imagine a church refusing to speak up against slavery? Here we've got two of the many abolitionists who helped fight against the transatlantic slave trade. William Carey, who was very active in campaigning against the practice of burning the widows of deceased husbands. This chap's called Edmund D. Morell, who fought the atrocities that King Leopold II was inflicting on the Congo. Amy Carmichael and child prostitution. This is Emmeline Pankhurst with women's suffrage. Lewis Hine, who fought against the terrible conditions in the United States, the tenement housing regulations. Martin Luther King and the Jim Crow laws and the segregation and all that. Can you imagine a church saying, no, we don't want anything to do with that, we're too busy doing other things? But did you also know that at the time these men and women were fighting the injustice of the day, the church turned and looked the other way? Not only were they ignoring the injustice, In many cases, they were obstructive to the reformers. And even, for example, in the case of the transatlantic slave trade, the Church of England owned one of the largest, the Codrington slave plantation. And the money from the Codrington slave plantation was funding, do you know what? It was funding the gospel going out into the outer parts of the world. Men and women, children were dying under this, what seemed like a noble cause. But now, today, every church would be happy to run a project along those lines. Now, the way that we're working at CBR UK, we have done a study into the history of social reform, like those cases I've just had up on the screen there. We've looked at how injustices start. We look at how they are sustained, and we look at how they end. We look at how one people group wants the labour or the possessions of another people group and overpowers them by the process of dehumanising them, by calling them animals, by calling them parasites, all kinds of ways to justify then exploiting them. Perpetrators of such evil have a facade of respectability. You think of King Leopold II saying that he was going into the Congo to Christianise it, to drive out the Arab slave trade, when in truth he was going in there to line his own pockets. 10 million, at least 10 million men, women and children died as a result of that. And the reformers were fighting against the missionary organisations to get the information out. But we also look, in our study of social reform, at how the activists end this seemingly impossible injustice, how they fight against the odds to see justice reinstated. So some of the lessons from social reform, I'll very quickly go through these. No social reformer has ever ended injustice by covering it up. We want to hide the uncomfortable. You're not going to end injustice that way. We've got to expose the deeds of darkness. Change seldom occurs unless the cost of maintaining the status quo becomes unbearable. In other words, we have got to make an injustice more uncomfortable to live with, to cohabit with, than it is to live without it. Injustice that is invisible will inevitably be tolerated. Injustice that is exposed will inevitably become intolerable. It's kind of putting those first two principles together. And this is the difficult one. We must accept the persecution that goes along with confronting injustice, because guess what? Nobody likes to be reminded of the part they play, whether it's through direct involvement or just apathy. Nobody likes to be reminded of an injustice. But it's exactly what Wilberforce, Clarkson, Granville Sharp, all the others were doing to help demonstrate not only the humanity of those who were stolen from Africa, but the inhumanity of the trade through etchings like this. Perhaps you know this photograph of Emmett Till. This is him in life and him in death. And these two pictures were, historians attribute them to really kick-starting and galvanizing the civil rights movement. This picture was used by the Congo reformers to show the brutality of what was actually happening in the Congo. This man looking at the severed hand and foot of his 5-year-old daughter, who had been cannibalized along with this man's wife by Leopold's men. All of a sudden, Leopold began to lose the propaganda wars because people could see the truth, and that was his undoing. Pictures are needed. The truth in all the evidence, the weight of that we need to get that out there lovingly, but people aren't going to understand an injustice until we do. Now comes the sort of, we've kind of been down into the pits here. It's been tough, but now I want to reassure you in the remaining minutes that this is a winnable battle, that we can see justice established again and the vulnerable protected. I wish you could see this better. Social reform is a process, and it's actually a lot more simple than you think. If you can change the way someone feels about a victim and about an injustice, then you stand a chance of changing the way they think about that injustice. So you can't change the way they behave. You can't expect somebody to behave differently until you've done those two things first, the feeling and the thinking. And we've done this. We've been going out on the streets for years with very large banners of showing these images that you saw earlier of aborted embryos and fetuses. And we see people change their minds all the time. So what we did to try and illustrate this is we put together a short video, and we've got hours and hours of this kind of footage. And I'm going to let these people speak for themselves. They were asked a question, what do you think of abortion? They were shown the abortion video, and then they were asked the same question again.
What do you think about abortion?
Each individual, it's up to them what they want to do.
I think everybody should be allowed the right.
I'm not really for it or against it.
Everyone has their right to kind of do what they feel is right in their own life.
So what I want to show now is a short 1-minute video of what an abortion procedure looks like at various stages from 10 to 24 weeks.
That baby is too big to be doing that.
Oh, allow it. No way.
God, sorry, I don't think I can do it. Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't look at it. Sorry.
So that's the video.
That was those babies were fully formed. It wasn't even like it was. They had hands.
I didn't know it was like that. That's a body. That's a full, not a full grown, but it's fully developed.
That really shouldn't be right. That's technically, even though the baby may not be out, that's technically, I will relate that to murder.
I don't think they should be cutting up babies like that. No.
I'm a bit speechless, actually.
It is a person, and people don't realise that. A lot of people think, oh, it's just a bunch of cells and that. To a point, but 3 months and on, you can really see the formation and everything. So, yeah.
People don't have abortions because they are bad people or they have these evil intentions, but because the abortion industry is deceiving them. There is an active deception going on in order to manipulate them into going into something that, if they really knew the facts like these people, would act very differently. Now, again, changing the way people behave, we want to do that. We have to change the way they feel and they think, and that will lead to a change in behaviour. And that's what led to the birth of this baby, whose mother had already taken the first abortion pill, and she'd come out and seen our pictures and changed her mind, and we managed to get the pill reversed. This baby's mother was on her way in to have an abortion. Her baby was moments away from looking like the ones in that film earlier. The next baby I'm going to show you, her parents saw our pictures when her baby, I'll have to show you afterwards, looked like that, and they changed their minds. And that was her a few months later, about 3 years later, and just recently. We have two options. We have two options, not three, not four, just two options. Like the priest and the Levite, we can cross over, we can bypass that victim, we can look the other way. That's one option. Or we can intervene. Matthew 25, terrifying passage. If we read it, and I'm not advocating for salvation by works here, we're saved by grace, but the evaluative criteria by which Jesus separates the sheep and the goats, and this is going to sound uncomfortable, is a works-related set of criteria. He is going to put the sheep on his right, the goats on his left, and he's going to turn to the sheep and he's going to say, when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was in prison, you visited me, and so on. And they're going to turn to him and say, Lord, when did we do this? And Jesus will reply, whenever you did it to one of the least of these, you did it as to me. And then he's going to turn to the goats, and it's going to be a very different thing. Now, I think that all this is showing is that our works are born out of faith. It's evidence that our faith is a saving faith. But the thing is, the priest and the Levite may well have felt pity for that beating victim. They might have felt all the right emotions, but Jesus picks up that they didn't do anything. The Samaritan turns up and he does something, he acts, he takes pity. And he, at great expense, he looks after that beating victim. Now, Martin Luther King Jr., when he was analysing this passage, he said, he kind of summarised all the things that must have been going on with the priest and the Levite. It wasn't their calling, they had meetings to go to. But Martin Luther King, he says, it's very possible that they looked at that beating victim and they thought, if I stop to help this man, what will happen to me? Because the robbers could still be around. The Good Samaritan turns up and he turns the question around. He says, if I don't stop to help this victim, what will happen to him? And I hope that's the attitude that we will have towards the unborn child. Thank you.